We continue our conversation on National Politics 2016 with Monmouth University political science professor Steve Chapman and Tim Tracey from the Monmouth University Polling Institute. Everybody says, and there's been a plethora of articles written about the fact that this is an election year unlike any other. And it all started with this anger, the supposed anger among the electorate, and that they're looking for an outsider. They don't want politics as normal. And that was the rise of Donald Trump and the rise of Bernie Sanders. Am I correct so far?
I would think so, yeah. I mean, we saw when we did some polling in the Republican primary, when we asked people on the Republican side whether or not they wanted someone with government experience or someone from outside of government by a almost 2-to-1 margin. What we were seeing in a lot of these polls nationally and in different states was that these Republican voters wanted someone outside, an outsider, as opposed to someone with government experience.
Which you would believe would be Donald Trump.
Correct. I would say, just add one qualifier, that normally around this time everybody says this is the worst it's ever been, that this is the nastiest election in the history of the United States.
And the most important election in our lifetime.
Of course,
yeah.
Of course.
That's always.
I always like to remind my students of the election of 1800 between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, which was one of the most vicious campaigns, dirty. You want to talk about name calling? Go back and check out some of the things they called each other. So it's all relative.
Didn't Andrew Jackson threaten to kill his opponent? So,
We've had many interesting occurrences throughout presidential elections.
But in modern times, let's just say in the TV time or the broadcast time, this you'd have to say is one of the most bizarre elections. We just mentioned Julian Assange, the fact that the founder of WikiLeaks has some stake in this election.
It is really interesting. I mean, both candidates, when you look at the polls nationally in the different states, I mean, their favorability ratings are upside down. So they're unliked by a majority of the American electorate. So it is just really interesting that you have basically, you know, on each side you have the Democrats dug in with their candidate, the Republicans dug in with their candidate. But really, where this election, as in with most elections, is going to be won amongst those independent voters, and even among them, they have an overwhelmingly unfavorable view of both candidates. So basically, this election, what it's coming down to is who they're going to hold their nose for and vote.
So what is the derivation of this, right? So we think about why is it the way it is? I mean, if we look at Congress, it's the most polarized Congress and has been for years, right? Or at least a few Congresses, increasing polarization. So does that match in the public? Well, there's some scholarly debate about that, but for the ones that say, yes, it is matched, it says, well, where do people get their information? Mostly from elite messaging, right? So we live in a polarized world. All of the messages that Americans receive are pretty polarized, so they adopt those positions and act accordingly. So it doesn't necessarily surprise me that this is a dirty, quote-unquote, campaign or a mudslinging campaign, to use the correct concept. But it's just sort of, it's understanding the outcomes of the consequences of polarization.
Well, it's a fascinating point, too. And now we have media, an MSNBC that leans left. You have Fox News that leans right. You have blogs. So if people want to get just conservative information, they have an outlet for that. If they want to get just liberal information, they have an outlet for that. You also have social media, where people are spewing left and right and angry. And so I don't believe it's all just Congress. I think Congress might be following the populace.
No, that's a great point, and that was going to be my next point. Is
sorry.
If you want, if you want to turn on and hear your message that you agree with, all you have to do is turn on whether it's Fox, as you mentioned, or it's MSNBC, or go to a blog that leans your direction.
Mm-hmm.
So there really is, Americans are not really listening to the other side as much as maybe they used to when this 24-hour cable news network world didn't exist. So you had Walter Cronkite, you had the nightly news, you had Dan Rather. You know, there really weren't these channels for you to kind of tune into the perspective that you agree with. You know, it used to be that you would hear both sides, and it really doesn't. It's really not like that anymore. And one of the most interesting things I saw was an article a couple weeks ago that Facebook has been looking at the number of people who have deleted people from their friends list or hid people from their news feed because of politics, and it's an unprecedented number. So it just really is such an interesting cycle.
That self-selection effect is absolutely true, right? I mean, people in today's media age, they're allowed to choose, or they have the ability to choose whatever they want to consume, right? This golden era, as we call it, of media, was not always the case, right? Sort of this post-war era to about the mid-'80s, where sort of we thought of the media as this, right, very reliable source of objective information. That actually wasn't always the case or the norm throughout the history of our country. Today's sort of partisan media outlets were the norm in sort of the birth of our country, right? Weren't be the Democrats back then, but different political parties, different political organizations would have their newspaper, right? And people could read only that newspaper. So it's not necessarily a new phenomenon.
Yes, but it's so pervasive now and so easy to get, and it validates your bias, and it never questions your bias. If you're closed-minded, you never have a chance to be open-minded because everything you believe is already validated. Reinforced, exactly. I want to get to one other point before we go to that, because you talked about the unfavorability of these two main candidates. You would think that would be an opportunity for a third-party candidate, and yet Gary Johnson, even though he's coming up into double digits in some polls, and Jill Stein, they haven't been able to get traction. Why?
Simply stated, the way we vote. The reason we have a two-party system in this country is because we have a single-member, first-past-the-post system. We have a majoritarian voting system.
So no matter how bad the candidates are, they're not going to go in.
It's going to default to two parties. It's Duverger's law. It's something that's very well known throughout the literature and political science, that because we have a majoritarian voting system, candidates will converge to the median. So if we have two candidates in the median, any candidate that comes from either side, they're just going to take votes away from that major candidate. So I tell my students, if you want a third party, I'm cool with that, but you have to change the electoral system.
And I'll leave with this. This will be airing before the first debate on September 26th. Do you see any way of Gary Johnson making it into that debate?
No. So what you have with the Commission on Presidential Debates has selected the 5 news outlets that they're going to use the polls as a way for Gary Johnson to meet the criteria to get on the debate. So that criteria is 15%, and Gary Johnson in national polls is polling, in the high single digits, sometimes around 10%. Again, the threshold is 15%. The problem is a third-party candidate hasn't reached that threshold since Ross Perot in 1992, and before then.
Did they even have that threshold in 1992? I think they made it because of Ross Perot, actually.
It could be that way. So just the realistic, the possibility of Gary Johnson getting to 15% is just. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Appreciate you being here. Monmouth University Political Science Professor Steve Chapman and Tim Tracey, Monmouth University Polling Institute. Dawn is up next.